happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 259 on May 18th, 2022. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the executive director, almost my old title, of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the beautiful University of Montana campus right here in Missoula, Montana, in beautiful western Montana. And joining me tonight, as always, good evening, Dr. Wes Fryer. How are you tonight, sir?
Good evening. Well, I just got a frog in my throat, so it's a good thing I have a drink. But yes, I'm here in central Oklahoma for a while longer, but we only have like 7 more days of school, I think. Maybe 6 actually, because a week from Friday is like 8th grade graduation, and that's it. So I am for a few more days the technology integration and innovation specialist at the Cassidy School. And I am looking forward to moving to North Carolina this summer and starting a new middle school computer science teaching role at Providence Day School. So lots of excitement. House is not sold yet, but hey, maybe it's sold today. It showed twice today, so fingers are crossed.
Absolutely. Well, while I'd love to talk about real estate with you, Dr. Fryer, I think we have another agenda. What is the EdTech Situation Room all about?
Well, we missed a week last week, which we sometimes do, but we generally are here on Wednesday evenings to talk about the recent technology news viewed through an educational lens. And we will probably end up talking a little bit about big tech and the tech correction, but we have all of our links on a Google Doc that you can find at edtechsr.com/links. And our topics tonight are Google and Google I/O, the tech correction, privacy, Apple, App World, Web3, and cryptocurrency, and the Ukraine-Russia war, as well as AI. We'll also have some Geeks of the Week. And since we did miss a week last week, we have a large list, but I guess that's fairly normal. So don't you think we should start with some real tech news, Dr. Neiffer, instead of just going right into the rabbit hole of
the tech correction and privacy and all of those stuff? Yeah, that's a great idea. So I have to admit to you that even though I'm a Google guy, I did not catch a whole lot of Google I/O last week. But more importantly, what I did catch, I thought was pretty snoozy, right? Like I thought it was relatively meh. And part of that is, and I will say that I did catch some media before Google I/O that, and maybe Google is catching this message that, instead of announcing new things, maybe Google should focus on polishing the things they already have. And to be quite frank, I think that could be said of Microsoft and Apple and even the Amazon ecosystem as well. But shall we start with the good stuff at Google I/O?
Absolutely. And I did not watch the entire thing, but I was able to catch a bit of it. So that sounds like a great place to start.
Okay, well, let's start with, I believe you shared an article regarding Google Maps.
Yeah, so I am always on the lookout for anything to do with Geo Maps. And it's one of these things that I enjoy dabbling with, but I need encouragement to oftentimes say, oh yeah, we need to go back and do a map project. So during the keynote, Google was doing some good live tweeting, and I should have this as a Geek of the Week because I expanded a Google Twitter list. Some of their employees, such as Miriam Daniel, VP of Google Maps, who's the author of this article on the Google blog. It says the keyword, but it's their this is, I guess, their products blog. This was from May 11th, and the headline is Immersive View Coming Soon to Maps, plus more updates. And it promises a more immersive, intuitive a more intuitive map. And the video that it has of downtown London, it's really amazing, showing just this incredible, 3D panorama, what they call immersive view. I think that must be like, there's Big Ben and cathedrals and, just really amazing places in London. And you are able to basically see like a drone view, but these are buildings, I guess, that have been both, photographed with satellites as well as perhaps other cameras, but then put together with Google tools. But then in addition, it's like I don't know, Google Maps meets drone flyby, because in addition to these, amazing panoramas from an aerial view, you're also able to actually go into buildings and zoom around. And so that's pretty cool. So I've honestly found myself using Apple Maps a little bit more than I have in the past, in part because some different restaurant apps or just other things, or sometimes when people will share a link. I don't know. I had really sworn off Apple Maps at one point because I'd been led astray a couple times, not to any devastating effect, like trying to drive into a body of water, like we've heard about some silly folks doing in the past, but just not going where we needed to go. But I do think Apple's done better with this. One of the things I've noticed with the maps, using them both, is Apple was like showing the stop signs and the traffic lights a lot more prominently, and it looks like Google is doing that as well. So anyway, some cool things coming to Google Maps. And on an educational note, I just say, not that we're all going to be teaching with phones and having all the kids get out their phones, but it depends on the age of students. Google Maps in the browser is better than ever with its features, and even supporting Street View and things like that, where you don't have to have the full version of Google Earth in order to utilize some of those tools. But seriously, if we're not taking advantage of some of these phenomenal geographic tools to help students make connections to places, to cultures, to history, even to math, right? Because there's measurement tools and things like that. Really, really phenomenally powerful. It has been for a long time, and it just keeps getting better. So, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the most underutilized Google tool sets as well, and I've seen some really phenomenal classroom projects that involve this particular tool set, and especially if you are of the social studies variety in the classroom, which was my background. I was a history, geography, and government teacher primarily when I was in the classroom. I think there's an incredible amount of cool things that you can build with this, and you think about it from this standpoint that we're not that far off from when coloring maps with markers was considered to be a pretty interactive experience, and that's just something that you don't need to bother with anymore, because there's really interesting things you could do to both tell stories with maps but also utilize them as learning tools via visualizations and feeding data into systems in order to help students draw conclusions and process the world around them. So I couldn't agree more. And in fact, while I don't think that was considered to be their headline here, because there were a lot of products introduced, to me that caught my eye as well.
I'll toss in two more links here, and who knows, maybe somebody hasn't heard of this before, but Jerome Berg, who's a fantastic California-based educator, created years ago the Google Lit Trips project, which originally was using Google Earth. Now there's a lot of this that you can actually access through Google Maps. But if you are an English teacher, if you are a language arts teacher, the ability to, take a book that you've studied, even something like the Iliad or the Odyssey, which have, I think, a couple different versions, sometimes depending on whether it's going to be a Mediterranean version or another. And it's been a while since I've done a deep dive into those, but that really, really is fantastic. We have had a Google certification group at our school that has met almost every month this year. And one of the things that, I think this was the best session that we actually had, was on what I would call Geo Maps. And so I'll drop the link to this Show with Media site that I've maintained since 2013 with a lot of different GeoMap resources. But the thing a lot of people don't realize is that this isn't like YouTube in terms of let's just look and watch the maps. You can do that and consume the map and just, use it as a sort of passive media. But you can create, your students can create, they can create tours, they can drop pins, they can do things collaboratively. I love being able to learn more about the maps. And I don't know if they're still doing them, but not too many years ago, Google was hosting Geo Institutes. I went to one on my own nickel up in Lewiston, Maine, and spent a couple days just diving, maybe it was one full day, I don't know, but it was just diving deep into these different Google tools and having folks really just kind of blow your mind. And so anyway, I think if anybody else has resources related to Geo Maps and Google Maps, I really think that those are things that we need to utilize ourselves. We do that with trips now, where we'll create, map pins, and with CarPlay in the car, it's pretty easy to be able to go to those, or on a device. So from a personal standpoint, in terms of travel, now that we're getting to travel a little bit more and that kind of thing, but just, for your own students, their own neighborhoods, finding their school, finding their houses, being able to have a sense of place and the connection with so many different things. Geo Maps are fantastic. So yay, Google. And yeah, that wasn't a headline, but that was one of those things of like, woo, that caught my eye. And
well,
I'm glad to see that update.
And very clear implications to classrooms too, I think, would be the other thing I would state there. And then you also posted an article, Wes, about Google Assistant updates. You want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. So the Google Assistant is the smart speaker of choice in our family. Jason, I think, continues. You're bilingual when it comes to the smart assistants,
Yes.
Madam A. But we went ahead and have been full on with the Google Assistant, and so I honestly thought, and I did not watch every minute of the keynote, but of what I watched, and then I watched some of those, like the Google keynote in 18 minutes or something, that summarized it all. This was really impressive. And so what it is, one of the big things is just trying to make the conversations more natural. Now, this could also weird people out, but in addition to matching your voice, you can also opt in to face match if you're using, now this just says the Nest Hub Max. We have a Nest Hub, but it's not the Max. So maybe we can't actually opt into that part. But they're bringing their facial recognition just so that, you can just walk up to the device and start talking. But then in terms of conversation, a couple things. They are using what they call the tensor chip to increase the fluidity of real-time conversation. And so you don't have to use the, what is it called? This, not the hot, I guess the hot word, which is usually, hey, G. As frequently. And so they're recognizing your voice and being able to respond. And really important focus on privacy, not only in this discussion of the keynote, but later. They made a claim in the Gmail part that they never they never advertise against what you have in Gmail, and they never sell that to third parties, which I really thought that was true, that they did that. But they were talking about how this is mostly all on device. And so this sounds like Apple, right? Where it's not all going to the cloud to then be, archived in part of your opaque, footprint that can be data mined and all that kind of stuff. So a real strong emphasis on privacy. This is actually not from the I/O conference, but I went to a face-to-face conference in Orlando, Florida, the Atlas conference a couple weeks ago, and I learned since our last show how they did the closed captioning, built-in tools in Microsoft PowerPoint and Google Slides. It was amazing when the presenters, and I think all the featured speakers and keynoters, had this turned on. I have not done a presentation with this yet. But when you had on this closed captioning feature in Google Slides or in PowerPoint, it was uncanny how, fantastically accurate, not perfect, of course, but how accurate it was. And again, that's a tie to AI, to voice recognition, what we see happening with the smart assistants, lots of those kinds of technologies continuing to mature. So does that have an immediate classroom impact? My geek of the week on our last show was this Google, what was it called? The Google Teachable machine, I think. That was just outstanding. And I don't know if I'm going to get to pull off a lesson with that before the end of school with the kids this year, but AI is big. It's changing our world. And there are some ways that students can experience some of the power of that, even though we're probably not, having a smart speaker in our classroom. We may have Siri, depending on the kinds of devices that we have. But glad to see those kinds of innovations. That's not the kind of like seismic change of, oh my gosh, it's, a whole new category of product, or, it's not that kind of thing. It's more the general continued evolution of the tools. But exciting, because those are things that I actually use pretty much every day, in terms of this text to speech. Am I saying that right? Speech to text. Smart Assistant, and then dictation. I'm using that stuff all the time. So
Right.
glad to see those continuing to mature.
And then I'll just note, and I'm just looking at a couple of different random lists from Google I/O. One thing that in my mind is literally 3 years too late for me personally is the announcement of the Pixel Watch. There is some excitement around Google trying to take Watch OS seriously. The bottom line for me, however, is that Watch OS is what Apple calls that. It's Wear OS is what Google calls their watch operating system. And I have to say, while I was a Google Watch, or I guess I should call it Android Wear enthusiast, it just didn't work consistently enough for me to be able to rely on it every day. And one of the reasons why I moved back to the Apple architecture for my personal devices is because the Apple Watch is something that I purchased, and unlike the Android Wear watches, I felt like this was here to stay with me. And in fact, I know very few people that have purchased an Apple Watch that aren't still wearing it, whereas I know very few people that were buying Android watches that were sticking with it. And so maybe too little too late. But I have to say that the ecosystem on the Google side is getting pretty well rounded. They did release additional Pixel Buds. They now have Pixel Bud Pros, and they're starting to pick up some of the wonderful strategies that Apple is using, including having the devices follow you. I'm sorry, having the connection follow you from device to device. I think that's a pretty good sign for Google. And I also feel as though Android 13 looks like a nice mature operating system that will released later this fall. The bottom line for me is that, and we've had this conversation probably 4 years in a row at both Apple events and Google events. The days are over where big, broad changes or new features are coming to these operating systems. These are polishes. And while I would agree with commenters that probably all of these platforms should be working more on polish and fortifying as opposed to new features, I feel like Google is pulling that off. That there was a lot of new interesting things that are happening under the hood as opposed to big, broad new sets of features. Messaging still a mess, particularly messaging apps are still a bit of a mess on Android. I would also argue that the privacy features in Android pale in comparison to what's happening over at Apple, but I still remain a Google devotee.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, to keep things, go ahead.
Did you do the one about the Chromebook screencast feature?
Not yet. No, it's on. Yeah, I did.
Okay, I was just, if you were gonna move on from Google.
Oh, no. We're gonna go to big Google news now.
Okay, excellent.
Big Google I/O news. So,
okay,
these articles are related. The first one is Chrome OS 101 has been released, and very exciting news from the folks at the Chrome OS team. We weren't here last week, but I would have reported that Chrome 101 had been delayed and then finally released last week. That I think it was 2 or 3 weeks late, and so that's something that is interesting to note. But there's a couple big things here. The first one is that this is a little thing, but there is a new boot screen for Chrome OS devices, and it is a black screen as opposed to a white screen. And having turned on a Chromebook in the middle of the night before, I have been greeted by the super glow of the Chrome OS logo. That's now been replaced by a black screen and a white logo. There's also a couple of interesting features that I think are probably pretty interesting to tech directors that utilize Google devices in their district. The first one is that Google's been working on a strategy for having firmware updates, not just to the laptop, but also things plugged into your laptop. And there's a new set of options in the update screen that has firmware updates. And not only can you download updates to the firmware to your laptop, so that's the software that is in the background on your hardware that helps run the operating system, but also if you have something like a dongle plugged in, let's say it's a Logitech dongle, theoretically, those are the types of devices that will start now getting pings from various services to update the firmware. And we've talked about this. It's been a year or two since we last had an article on this, but a surprisingly large number of peripherals like like that. So, wireless dongles for keyboards and mice and other devices can oftentimes have huge, massive security risk to them because they're just not updated that often. If you have a cheap one that's not updated ever, it could really introduce real security issues on your laptop. A couple other quick things, and then I'll get to what I think is the most exciting feature. There is also some new ways to recover over the network. Right now, if you completely bork your Chrome operating system software, in other words, you can't power wash it or reset it, which happens once in a while. It's happened to me probably 4 or 5 times in the last 7 or 8 years of being a Chromebook user. Usually what you'd have to do is go to a second computer, take a USB drive. You can install a little extension on your browser, and it will help you download the firmware to stick into the USB drive and then reinstall the operating system. For new Chromebooks, we're talking about stuff released in 2022, at least for now. You now have the option for what's referred to as an internet recovery or network recovery. So you can essentially say, well, here's my networking information, my Wi-Fi password, or if you plug in your Chromebook or Chromebox into a wired network, you can now restore from the internet, which I think is an incredibly a good feature, and I would imagine helps out some IT directors quite a bit as well. But Wes, you also mentioned, I think probably the most exciting new feature in Chrome OS 101, which is a new screencasting tool. You want to talk about that for a second?
Well, actually, I want to mention that I don't think it's in the article, but it appears that the number one pain point for us with our Chromebooks this year has been resolved with this new Google update. And it's what we've called the loop in Minecraft education. And it has been so frustrating. Literally every week, I've got kids that have had to power wash in order to get Minecraft education working. I thought it had something to do with some security settings or something maybe that our IT admins have done. But anyway, this last week, for the first time, without a power wash, but an update to that latest OS, those loop issues where kids it would be in an infinite loop and it wouldn't let them log into their Microsoft account became resolved. So I don't know what that was. It's been maddening, but that's resolved. I actually don't know about this new new screenshot and screencasting, but I'm super excited about it because this year for fifth and sixth grade media literacy, we did not do any Screencastify. We went 100% with the built-in tools to not only take screenshots, but also screencasts and do screen recording. So yeah, please illuminate me because I am excited about any updates that they've done to it.
Yeah, so this has been stuck in a beta channel for a while, and it had been called Projector, which was the internal name for this. And we reported on this 7, 8, 9 weeks ago, I think, that this was coming up soon. But the screencast feature, it's now called just Screencast, is not just about recording your screen. It also adds a lot of new features, including the ability to annotate video, which I think is super great. Think like Telestrator, John Madden telestrating on a screen. And one of the things that I think of myself whenever I think of screencasting on any device is that it really just adds some extra communication ability, especially when you're trying to explain something to someone else via email or perhaps chat, right? Like it happens a lot more than it did, like, say, 10 years ago, but we have students now that will put in support tickets with my day job, the state virtual school in Montana, and share screencasts as opposed to just trying to describe what the situation is. And having this feature set built directly into the operating system is an extraordinary movement forward for Chrome. Not that there isn't third-party options, there are dozens of them, right? But the fact that it's built directly into it and no extension needs to be installed means that effectively all continuously updated Chromebooks in your school building now have this screencast ability, which I think is pretty extraordinary. It also saves it directly to Google Drive, so it automatically syncs to Google Drive. And like the screen capture tool, which also keeps getting more and more feature rich, it's competitive with commercial alternatives, which I think is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, that is fantastic. The built-in tool, which we've had since the beginning of this school year. So it was interesting. Our Chromebooks like shipped because we got them new in August. They shipped in like, May or June or something like that. And the OS that was originally on them didn't have the built-in screen capture and screen recording feature, but with an update in August, boom, they did. And so all 3 trimesters this year, we've used those. But what you're talking about with the sync automatically to Google Drive is huge, because up to this point, it has been a local save in the downloads folder. And yeah, the ability to do this annotation and markup. I'm reminded of my favorite Mac screencasting tool, which is commercial and you have to buy, ScreenFlow, which I still love and
Yep.
I use from time to time. But then I've used during the pandemic, and still now use Loom, Loom, which has a free version for educators. Sign in with Google. It's kind of cool. It has your picture there in the corner. What I'm going to observe is probably still important, though, is going to be the video RAM and the video card that you have in your Chromebook. I know that when we're running Minecraft education and my kids are screen recording, and this is on a, you know, spring model 2021, Dell 11 Chromebook, 3220, I think is the model. There's flashing on the screen and it looks kind of glitchy when they're actually recording it. The final video itself is recorded. But I think this points to, the importance of having some robust processing power in
Yep.
your Chromebook. And like we had said, long time ago in past episodes, when the Chromebooks originally were having like, hey, do you want 2 gigs or 4 gigs of RAM? No, there's no way, you wanted to just go with 2 gigs. And so not only having more RAM, but having a more robust processor, is going to allow you to do more stuff with video. But the fact this is built in is huge, because yes, Screencastify was a free, extension. And I'm sure they're, wringing their hands. Just, what do they call that? The Sherlocking, when like Apple would take this feature and bundle it and put it in. But I definitely believe that not only capturing screenshots, and can you annotate? Did they update the screenshot feature too with some annotation, or did you know?
Well, I think that that's been a couple versions back, that the annotation has improved pretty dramatically on screenshots, because that was one of the issues with the built-in tool that was released in 2021. The other interesting feature that I don't think there's anyone that's doing this. Speaking, it's like Sherlock Plus. It also auto generates a transcript that comes in a timecode file, which means you can close caption the video, and that's, I mean, especially in light of the fact that accessibility is such an important part of distance and digital learning in 2022, and yet the tool sets for them are not super advanced. It's just really thoughtful. And one of the reasons why I'm having a problem moving away from a Chromebook environment, even though I'm kind of Mac guy again, is that every time I open my Chromebook, there's something new and interesting in the operating system. It's getting so polished and really quite advanced that, for, again, if you live in the web-based world and you don't need specific applications and can live in the web, I just think there's no reason to invest, no reason not to invest. Is that what I'm trying to say? Yes, because you want to invest in a $500 medium end Chromebook that I think could easily be a daily driver for even a power user.
And what I'd add to that is, if you think you can't live in the cloud, maybe you need to have a conversation with somebody who is even more into cloud applications for the kinds of things that you're doing. Because even video editing with WeVideo, but certainly just about any kind of photo editing, media creation, whether it's Adobe Express, Adobe full-on Creative Cloud. You're a big Canva user, which I haven't played a lot with, but these tools are web-based and they're incredibly powerful. So I feel like I have to preface a comment like this with, I love, well, you kind of do too now too. We love our Macs, we love our Apple stuff,
Yeah.
but like the power of this with Google is so fantastic.
Yeah.
And when you look at how many Chromebooks are deployed in schools and how important the cost factor is, I'm actually going to be moving to an Apple school. I think that iPads and Mac laptops are standard, are going to be across the board for our students and for teachers. But for the situation I've been in here in Oklahoma City, in the middle school, man, the Chromebook has been a fantastic choice. And, I'm wanting my kids to create media all the time. That's one of the big things that I believe and want to do, and that the classes I teach are focused on. And I have not felt constrained and limited in any way by having Chromebooks. And even the stylus that we've had has just, it's been fantastic. I mean, the only thing is like on Procreate, when you're doing a sketch note, it does this awesome export of like time lapse, step by step, exactly what you drew. And I don't have a tool that'll do that. But yeah, that we don't have to have that. We've been able to do everything that we want to do, and do it really well. And then when a kid has a device go down, okay, here you go. I loaned my Chromebook out to a student today, no problem. Just log yourself in, got all your stuff.
Yeah,
it's just phenomenal. So,
well, I'll mention, I'm sure I've mentioned this maybe 13 or 14 times in the history of our podcast, but I'll never forget, this was 3 or 4 years ago when I was carrying around, I believe it was a Windows laptop at the time for work, and it was broken. It just stopped working on a work trip that I absolutely needed a good laptop at. And as it turns out, I had been using a Chromebook, fairly regularly, but that wasn't what I was happening to carry that weekend. I walked into Staples, and $130 later, I walked out with my laptop, and it took 10 minutes from plug-in to work, where I completely had my entire desktop system back, wallpaper links, password saved in the browser, every piece of software or extension I had installed, and I was back to normal again and was able to do my job. And that's just unparalleled in comparison to the Mac OS and the Windows operating system. That just doesn't work like that there.
And if you've experienced, as I think for sure Jason and I both have multiple times, the pain of yourself moving to a new computer and having to migrate all the applications and everything, helping others, especially people that haven't been doing diligent backups. But even when you have, the amount of gigabytes, the installation, the time that's involved, I remember the first time, it was actually in Lewiston, Maine, that I saw a Chromebook and it booted in 8 seconds. And I was like, what are you even talking about? Like, game changer. And that same kind of thing, like, you don't have this happen. I don't think many of us do, just really frequently, where you have this like, wow, that changes the game. And Chrome really has done that. So I got a question for you, Jason. We very likely could be purchasing some personal devices. It looks like our daughter will actually get a MacBook Air at her school where she's going in Virginia.
Awesome.
For the prep school. So we're off the hook for needing to buy her a computer. And then the academy, it looks like she'll go to the Air Force Academy after that. They have Windows computers that they purchased. But for my wife, who doesn't have a teaching position and may be doing something else next year, we're not exactly sure. Chromebook advice. You were buying a Chromebook tomorrow, kind of what you're saying, like a mid-range, maybe 500, 400. Do you have a model?
Well, first and foremost, there's two things I would say. The first one is that if you've got time and you don't mind being slightly risky about it, I still think that good Chromebooks are one of the most underpriced things when you're buying them on the used market on eBay. And I've been really trying hard not to buy more Chromebooks because I don't need them is the fact of the matter. But I'm trying to see if I have the one sitting up here or not. But I'll give you an example of this. 6 weeks ago, there's a beautiful HP model. It's the 10th generation i5 model. These were $700 fall 2020, and I know that because we purchased a half dozen of them at work in the early pandemic. And I just happened to be surfing one day, and there was one that didn't have a bid on it yet, and I picked it up for $115. It was less than a year and a half old. According to the Chrome statistics, it only had 9 battery cycles on it. It was practically a new thing. The only thing it didn't come with was a charger, but since it's USB-C, it doesn't matter. I carry around the big clunky Apple USB-C charger because it's so high quality and I trust that hardware. But there's two Chromebooks I want to highlight. The first one comes from Kevin Toffel, posted the article. It was today even, on the upcoming Chromebook, Acer Chromebook Spin 714, which is a 14-inch Chromebook that is right now listed at $750. That's going to come down in price almost certainly, because most of these high-end Chromebooks do. And it's going to have the 12th generation i5 chip with 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 256 gigabytes of hard drive storage. But also it has a 14-inch screen with thin bezels on it. So it's going to be a nice immersive experience despite its relatively svelte size. And so I trust Kevin Toffel. He's an excellent commentator. The only two websites that I go to for Chrome news are About Chromebooks and Chrome Unboxed, Robbie Payne's website. Both are excellent news sources for Chrome operating system, but I'd be considering that as one of the Chromebooks. And then we just needed to pick up a couple Chromebooks at work for a couple new part-time staff. And I'm going to pause for just a second and fill this with time as I go to Best Buy to look at what models we picked up. But there was a Chromebook sale at Best Buy a couple of weeks ago, so we picked them up with our corporate account. And I'm incredibly impressed with an HP Chromebook that has a wonderful build quality, great high resolution screen, and just a fabulous keyboard. And that Chromebook model is known as the, almost there, I thought I had faster internet than this, running out of things to say, the HP 13.5 2-in-1 X360 Chromebook. And amazed by the build quality. It is as good as the MacBook Air, and right now it's that's a $949 Chromebook. I picked it up for $550. It's currently $649 at Best Buy, and 9 years of updates, all metal chassis, beautiful keyboard, fingerprint reader for security.
Can you say the name of it again? The model?
Yeah, it's an HP 13.5 2-in-1 X360.
Okay, cool. I'm getting that in our show notes.
And so I love that a lot, and I think it's and I've only played around with it for about an hour, but it has that nice 11th generation i5 chip in it, and which is way faster than the 10th generation i5 chips. So that you can buy at the $649 mark, you're pretty close to, if you wanted to buy an Apple refurbished MacBook Air, right? That's $200, maybe $250 more, depending on which model you're going for. But if you are satisfied with the Chrome universe, it's an outstanding model. But that said, though, if you want to play a little bit of eBay Parcheesi, there's just opportunities all the time of underpriced premium Chromebooks sitting around on eBay.
That's awesome. Well, it'll be interesting. When my wife taught at a school called Positive Tomorrows downtown, she was on a Chromebook for 4 years, really liked it, and kind of had, it was kind of a challenge switching over to the Mac. Now she's been on the Mac for 4 years. So it'll be interesting to see what it is she wants to do. But it is good to see those options. And we're probably actually going to update her phone. She's still on a home button, SE. And she's doing so much on her phone all the time now for her health coaching. So anyway, again, swappa.com. If you're not familiar, great place to pick up some used iPhones, and we'll be doing that again. All right. Well, we better get on to some other news besides the Googles. Where would you like to go next?
Well, let's do a quick privacy article, and then we could jump into the rabbit hole known as the tech correction. I spotted this article this morning, and it really echoes what we've been talking about for years now. But this is from 9 to 5 Mac. I think this appeared in other outlets as well. Ben Lovejoy writes that your online behavior and location are shared with advertisers an average of 749 times a day. And they're talking about a report, and there's a couple interesting things about this. the Irish Council for Civil Liberties talks about companies that are selling your data either in aggregate or as part of data sets. That Google, this is citing the report, Google and other key players in the high velocity surveillance based ad auction system are processing and passing people's data billions of times a day. RTB, which is the reference here to real-time bidding, which is one of the ways that advertisers do get your data, right? So they can target ads to you based on where you're at and what you're doing. It's the biggest data breach ever recorded. It tracks and shares what people view online in their real-world location 294 billion times a day in the US and 197 billion times a day in Europe. Now, there's a couple things about this. First, creepy, right? And Dr. Fryer refers quite often to surveillance capitalism. Well, this is what this is, right? That's surveillance capitalism 101. But I would add a second note here that Europe is doing a much more aggressive job at regulating this. And there's two ways to look at this. You could either say, Europe is half the number of times per person than in the United States. The United States is double, where our regulations are much less nuanced and much less hardcore. But you could also say, despite all the efforts that Europe is making to try to stop this capitalism, stop this tracking, it's still pretty bad and still a major issue for European users. And the bottom line is that you can go out and buy maybe not necessarily Wes Fryer's data, right? Although I do know that there are some services that are more in the clandestine world where you can do that. But I do know from talking to people that do buy data sets, and I've had this conversation with people in both nonprofit and for-profit industries. If you want to go find a list of email addresses of people that visited a physical location recently, it's not that hard to do that. And in fact, that's a very real way that you can not necessarily directly violate someone's privacy, but de facto violate their privacy by getting a list of, those people that have gone into that store or have been in this town or been in this location and just had their cell phone with them.
We need to have some regulation around the collection and sale of data. There is not a single disincentive right now in the United States for the perpetual collection and aggregation of this data about vast numbers of people. And so that has created economies that have been utilized in different ways by different companies. But I want to share a quick anecdote. So I was on a camp out with our sixth graders the last 2 days. It was wonderful. We had a chance to go down to southern Oklahoma, and I don't know if everybody knew this, but the Arbuckle Mountains, I guess, are like some of the oldest rocks that are on the surface of the earth. Well, I should take this back. On the surface of North America, are actually, in Oklahoma in the Arbuckle Mountains, which we use that term loosely. It's nothing like what you're seeing behind Dr. Neiffer on his wonderful, background there, which is, by the way, right outside his door. So, the dad I was visiting with, his 30-something-year-old son has worked for Microsoft and has worked for Google and a whole bunch of companies. But part of his stint was working with a team that ballooned to about 300 Googlers that were working to try to respond to GDPR and to cries for privacy and trying to limit some of the things that Google was doing. But ultimately he left Google convinced that they are the quote unquote evil empire, evil company that people had talked about. Basically, that there was a lot of window dressing and shuffling of papers and creation of responses and legalese. But, the bottom line was Google wanted to keep on doing exactly what they were doing because it's extremely profitable. And to an extent, if we want to put the sort of metacognition lenses on ourselves, Google I/O, it is a lot about propaganda. I mean, it is a lot about developers and getting folks excited. But, I plead guilty to this with my kids. I'm showing them Flutter Pinball. I don't know if I didn't put this as a Geek of the Week, but it's this web-based game that they brought out, which is really awesome and cool. And it's showing off the features and the power. And, it's not an either or, it's both. I do believe we have incredibly cool, wonderful, transformative technologies that are making a difference in our lives as consumers and individuals, but also as teachers and educators and learners. And at the same time, we have some consequences and some things happening that have had impacts and continue to on representative democracy, on human rights, on the ability for these data sets to be weaponized and not only utilized by political groups, but to be utilized by individuals, people who want to stalk folks, people who want to do harm and do harm to others. So it really is complicated. But I will say that I think we need to have some level of regulation around the perpetual collection of data and the sale of that, because I don't know if you've ever used Glimpse or the share my live location, Jason. You can do that in Google Maps now, actually, when you're on a trip. We've done that with our family before. Glimpse kind of has not been wonky and hadn't worked as much when we travel, but it's cool because it sends a text message, to your relatives. You don't post this on social media, but it shows, here I am, here's my live location. And you might never think, oh, I would just share that with the entire world. But what you're describing in this article is basically that, saying, we are through our devices sharing our location live, and that basically, companies have monetized that and they can purchase that and utilize that. And for a lot of folks, they're shrugging their shoulders and saying, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But when these things become normalized and we have millions of people, shrugging their shoulders saying it doesn't matter, it does matter. And
Right.
the ways that this data is utilized. And again, we need students to be using data and to be savvy. The kinds of A/B testing that these companies can do with all sorts of things, and just the wide gap, I would say, between, let's look at the K-12 math curriculum and what, data, analysts and probably just, I don't know, run of the mill may not be the right word, but just kind of your standard, employee at Google who is looking at data analytics. There's a big gap there, and there's various ways that we need to be addressing this. So I will say that at my new school, our computer science department's being renamed Ideas, and the A is for analytics. And I am excited to see the direction that that's going to take, with intention to say we need our kids to be savvy and powerful with analytics and being able to utilize analytics, read analytics, but use them to good effect. And that is a shocking article, and I will look forward to diving even deeper into it. And we've mentioned Jumbo before, but there are these tools like Jumbo for privacy that will allow you to periodically delete some of your data, like your Google Maps data. Do you need Google forever, to keep all the location data of everywhere you've been? Now, if it's been uploaded to the cloud and somebody's already archived it, maybe it's too late, but probably not. Privacy settings can make a difference. And so you can decide how you want to save things and how long you want to let those things be saved in the Google Cloud, and if you want to have them deleted on an automated basis. And that's called Jumbo Privacy. If you know of other tools that are like that, please let us know. We shared that one probably over a year ago on the show.
Yep, totally. And one of the story just about that map sharing piece, that also works on Apple. If you use Apple Maps to go to a location, you can share, like if you go on Apple Maps and say, I want to go to like my friend Mike's house, right? And his address is in my contacts, and I say share my location, it texts Mike when I'm near his house, right? Which is just an incredibly interesting prospect that I think is pretty wonderful and very useful. But you're exactly right. We need to find a way to have these tools be friendly to the consumer and do the great things that I know they can do without doubling down on the creepy factor. And I think that's really important stuff. So Dr. Fryer, I see that we are down to about 10 minutes left for the rest of the time. Do we want to go down the tech correction rabbit hole, or do we want to pick up some other stuff?
I mean, we could do a couple. I definitely want to at least do one Elon Musk, but could I ask you to pick up the catfishing one? This is from a couple weeks ago, but the Montana
Oh yeah.
Catfish?
So to be clear, it's not a Montana story. It just appeared in Montana
Oh, okay.
NBC, right? But it's an important piece no matter what, right? So a teacher in Michigan sent nude photos to students, right? And you hear that headline, and that's terrible, terrible, terrible. But if you start to dig into the story, what actually happened was that students this process apparently is called catfishing, where you try to get compromising information from a target. They pretended to be a woman that he met in an online dating site, right? Started a chat with that, and I'm an old guy, so I don't really know how this dating culture works, but apparently it is common, according to this article, for people to sometimes send nude photographs of themselves as a part of the courtship process. Again, I'm old, so I don't know what this is all about, but apparently the women pretended to be, or I'm sorry, the students pretend to be a 35-year-old woman on a dating site to get the guy to send his nude photographs. And then the students oh, and by the way, they sent nude photographs that they had found, I'm assuming, on the internet somewhere, of some other woman to try to encourage us to go back and forth.
And that's what catfishing is, by the way. Catfishing is when they will take pictures of someone and create a persona, and then try to have a relationship with somebody fictitious. With basically, it's not just an alias, but with a completely stolen persona. So yeah, that was all stolen pictures that these kids used, sending it to this teacher.
Yeah. And so, eventually this became reported to authorities, and the bottom line is that it is not illegal to send nude photographs to another adult. It is illegal to send them to people under the age of 18, and I would imagine violate all sorts of guidelines in regards to students in a program of where you work at school. But the bottom line is that obviously the story was much more complicated. I find it somewhat troubling sometimes that teachers have to act beyond reproach with things, right? I'm reminded of the advice I was given 25 years ago in my teacher ed program. This was aimed at teachers that were going into rural areas, very rural areas, that you should never go to the bar in the county that you teach in. You should always go to the next county over if you want to imbibe in alcoholic beverages. That seems like such a naive time in comparison to stories about students catfishing teachers in order to get nudes back from that teacher. So the bottom line is, be careful out there and know who you're sending photographs to.
The charges, the article notes, were dropped against the teacher
Yeah.
when they got all the details as far as that it was catfishing. But
Yeah.
that's one of those vocabulary words to let people know about. The website, This Person Does Not Exist, is one, along with haveibeenpwned.com, that I show my kids. Actually, you need to be careful because there's a couple different This Person Does Not Exist. And I'll find the link. But it's an AI-based system that puts together, it creates faces of people who have never existed before. And so for catfishing, I think though that would more work for just a fake profile that somebody would be creating on social media. For catfishing, they're going to want a series of photographs because they're going to try to create this illusion that they are this person and try to trick somebody with that.
Yep, absolutely.
But on the note of fake accounts, one that I want to pick up real quick, and I have it underneath that, under the tech correction. I originally got this off of Yahoo Finance, and for some reason their website was down. So I found the same article on Business Insider India, which is not a website I necessarily am reading daily. But the headline is, Elon Musk says $44 billion Twitter deal can't proceed until CEO proves the platform has fewer than 5% fake accounts. I told this to a friend today. Articles like this kind of remind me a little bit about our former president, where, any odd tweet would just suddenly become a headline. And that's happening with Elon Musk, who, by the way, did say last week, we didn't have a show, that if he becomes the owner of Twitter, he will restore President Trump to Twitter, because he thinks it was a mistake that he was removed. So now, and who knows why, but he is saying that his offer and the buyout was based on the SEC filings of Twitter being accurate, and Twitter claims that they have less than 5% fake accounts, which is pretty interesting. That whole concept is pretty big because when you look at the weaponization of Twitter, the use of Twitter by bad actors to do malicious and harmful things, a lot of that kind of activity centers around fake accounts that become bot accounts and that real people are not connected to. There are important issues to talk about in terms of validation of identity. If you happen to be in, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Iran or Russia or a host of other countries, if the social media platform required a biometric ID like a retinal scan or a thumbprint or something else, that can be problematic for folks that are putting themselves at risk, journalists and others that are sharing, human rights activists. So anyway, that was an interesting article. And I just generally think that we're going to continue wringing our hands about social media, but not really doing anything about it. We have seemed to have these big events happen, these breaches, this, Jonathan, who was the guy after Cambridge Analytica, with the pink hair, I don't know. We've had multiple instances of whistleblowers coming forward with shocking revelations and shocking insights, and Congress people stand up and grandstand and do nothing. And so I'm not optimistic that anything is going to happen, but I thought that was interesting. And I will say that the power to control a platform like Twitter, which is, that power has been in Jack Dorsey and the board of Twitter, for quite a while. But shifting that out of being a publicly owned company and into private hands, again, I wonder, would that be a catalyst, and will that even be allowed to happen? These are things that we haven't had to grapple with before in Earth history, right? We didn't have these platforms that would give individuals the direct ability to speak to millions of people and to say pretty much whatever they want. And so conceptions of free speech, conceptions of moderation of content, the differences that we have between countries in terms of what is allowable and permissible and what is not. Fascinating issues. Are these topics in your curriculum anywhere in your school? They should be. These are really important issues, and they definitely touch on citizenship and civics as far as what our values are, what our laws in terms of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, restrict as well as protect, but also our ideas about what we should allow and what we shouldn't allow in the quote unquote public square.
Well, and I want to do one other article that's been kind of sitting in our archives for a couple of weeks, because it's just an example of how we aren't getting this figured out. Like, things are happening very fast, and it takes a while for things to catch up. Social media obviously is in a lot of ways in a very advanced stage of that. We're not catching up. But there was an article on April 13th in USA Today about some San Francisco police to pull over an automated vehicle. And my understanding was over a headlights issue. And so they walk up to it. It's a Cruise a vehicle. I hadn't heard of the Cruise company before. That was new to me. But they walked up to the car and then realized that there was no driver inside the car. So it was a headlights issue, not a speed issue. The car figured out was being pulled over, and they also hear sirens, so they know when to pull over for sirens, right? Either if they're being pulled over or if it's an emergency situation, they need to pull over. And there's a funny Instagram video where that a bystander is seeing this happen, and then the car itself doesn't understand what's going on, so it takes off, and that's problematic too. And it's funny because Cruise released information saying that, well, there's a YouTube video available, and I believe it's from Cruise, right? Yeah, that gives cops, it's a guide to first responders on how to interact with a Cruise autonomous vehicle. But just wrap your brain around for a moment the advice that, listen, cops, we know what you're trying to do here. Make sure you check YouTube before you try to deal with pulling over one of our cars. Like, it just tells you how chaotic this technology rollout is. I'm personally kind of excited about autonomous cars at some point because I'd love to be able to travel via car and continue to get work done or to not have to pay attention to the road. I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, and I think there's massive challenges to that still remain to be done. So I'm not against the technology, but we do have to figure out things. Who's liable when the car breaks the law, and what happens if the car is Cruise said in a statement that it was a human error that led to this happening and that no citation was issued. But as it turns out, a human error leads to when someone else gets pulled over for a ticket as well. So that's not the best argument to make to explain what's going on. But just you start to go down this rabbit hole, it's pretty hard to get back out again.
And it makes me think about elevators and fire keys, right? Because fire departments have these keys. I think haven't been a fireman, but they can go in and override, and they've got this special key, that allows them to go in and take control. Well, do police need something like that for a self-driving car? For something that's come in to be able to be like, okay, I'm shutting you down or whatever. To watch that video, to see these cops coming up, and like you said, they're interacting with a robot. And let's take it one step further, right? Because we live in the DIY age, and the age of the hacker, and hacking can be a very positive and good thing. It's not all black hat, negative hacking. There's really Steve Wozniak and others, that have started the whole internet revolution, the PC revolution, really well before the internet. A whole generation of hackers, but think about the weaponization of these platforms. Think about what, as self-driving car capabilities become more and more normalized, as well as drones, folks are going to be able to do with these technologies to, we've got, unfortunately, different shootings, happening around the country. We've been fortunate here in the United States to not have lots of roadside bombs and common acts of terrorism that certain parts of the world, those things have at times been very normal. So I think that dealing with extreme fringe and finding ways to build in protections, balancing, security and safety, with public interest and with freedom, all of these things are super important. And no, that wasn't a killer drone that the cops were dealing with. It was a self-driving car. But still, the fact that they are coming up to a driverless car, maybe fairly powerless to do anything. I mean, unlock the vehicle. There was no one to shout at inside to say, you will open the vehicle. I mean, I guess they could have used their weapons and, broken the glass and opened the door, but really a sign of the times and a sign of issues that we need kids to grapple with, right?
Yep.
The current generation, the next generation, these are the kinds of problems that we need to wrestle with. So, Dr. Neiffer, I'm afraid the time has slipped by yet again, and we have talked for an hour.
Yep, we have. Well, Dr. Fryer, what is your Geek of the Week, sir?
Okay, I have got two quick ones. I learned this last week about a great free WordPress plugin from Google, and it is called SiteKit. And I went ahead and installed this on a couple of my Google sites, and it really facilitates the process of getting Google Analytics. If you'd like to join the surveillance state and help, or perhaps profit from it yourself in a very minuscule way, you can run Google ads, but also have a lot of really good data from Google Analytics about your site and who's visiting and who's leaving and the pages and all of that kind of stuff. So that's free and good. ERCOT is, I think, the organization that supervises power and regulates power in Texas, which is kind of wild. You may have remembered that we had an almost catastrophic failure of the entire power grid in Texas, I think winter before last. So there was a tweet that Doug Lewin, who is, anyway, he's on Twitter, and I've got the link in there. He's got some graphs showing how the peak forecasts in early May were just fluctuating big time. And if indeed we have the very hot summer that some people are saying we're going to have, it's a little crazy to see how much power is costing and whether or not, in Texas specifically, they're going to be able to meet demand. And then last of all, in my overshare, I'm going to share Akinator. Have you heard of the Akinator game, Dr. Neiffer, or played it? Well,
I have not.
One of my fifth graders shared it with me. This is a Swedish-based game that's sort of like 20 questions. And so you think in your mind of, Tom Hanks or Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever, some famous celebrity movie star. And then the app, the AI built or powered app will start asking you questions. And then in short order, it will guess exactly who you are thinking of, but did not say. And it is uncanny. And it's really fun to use with kids. The explanations, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So a cool use of AI, free and open source. Of course, it's getting smarter the more we use it. And so the Akinator folks are happy, I'm sure, to have that as a Geek of the Week, because the boost that they're going to receive in traffic is going to be unbelievable following EdTech Situation Room episode 259.
Sorry, I was just playing Akinator. And I would like to share. So, I sometimes share some information about my health. I'm immunocompromised, which means I've been extra COVID careful. I've had a kidney transplant, which means I take immunosuppressant drugs, 3 of them, as a matter of fact. And for better or for worse, the drugs have meant that COVID vaccines, have been less effective. And in fact, I'm participating in a Johns Hopkins study about solid organ transplant patients on that very issue. I'm going to get some Evushul on Friday, which is the prophylactic drug that's been approved for emergency use. That it can either help prevent COVID or make COVID less severe. And there's some very impressive data from Europe for organ transplant patients. But next month, I'm probably flying twice, which huge deal for me. I'm still going to be wearing my N95 mask anywhere. I have a variety of very high quality N95 masks. I become a bit of a connoisseur of that, but I've had to book some airline flights recently. I have a family graduation I'm going to in Oregon, and I may go to a work thing in Denver at the end of June. But a reminder, if you're going back into travel, although most people have already jumped back in before I have, one of the best places to find flights is Google Flights, because it's not trying to sell you a flight. And in fact, this is based on, and I can't remember the name of the system now, but there used to be a massive flight database that existed pre-internet that Google bought like 7 or 8 years ago that they turned into Google Flights. But it's a wonderful tool for trying to find flights that, over multiple airlines, but they're not getting a cut of any of it. They're just doing it as part of its information mission. And I've been able to find great deals this way, and it will link directly to the flight directly to the airline's website, which is where I think you should be buying your flights and not going through a third-party piece. Sometimes that costs more, and also there tends to be less flexibility, and airlines sometimes are a little snooty when you don't buy directly from them. So Google Flights, flights.google.com.
And it actually shows the amount of emissions that
Yes.
that particular flight on that aircraft is going to, the amount of carbon dioxide that's going to put in the atmosphere, which is very interesting. I've never seen that before on a flight purchase search, a flight tool.
Yep, totally.
Wow.
Well, Wes, we're at the end. Where can people find you on the internet?
I'm W Fryer on Twitter. You can visit wesfryer.com/after and come cook with me on TikTok.
Awesome. And I am at Tech Savvy Teach on Twitter. This here, however, is the EdTech Situation Room. We are a once-a-week podcast on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central Time, although moving later this summer to a aggregated podcast app near you to 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Central Time, and 9 p.m. On the East Coast, where Dr. Fryer will quickly be a denizen of that time zone soon. But if you don't want to join us live, although we wish you would, find us wherever find our podcasts are aggregated. You can go to YouTube, you can go to Facebook, you can download a small tiny copy of it at edtechsr.com, our website, or find all the links edtechsr.com/links. Until next time, stay safe, stay savvy, and we hope to see you on the next EdTech Situation Room. Good night.
Good night, everybody.